I'm Jami Floyd, and welcome to TED Talks in NYC, the series that brings TED.com's celebrated conversations to television and keeps the conversation going with some of the brightest minds in New York City. This week, redefining disability and the concept of beauty. No one knows better about this than model and actress Aimee Mullins. She's been an amputee her whole life and knows firsthand that having a disability can impact how others perceive you. But as her 2009 TED Talk suggests, the conversation is starting to change.
I was speaking to a group of about 300 kids, ages 6 to 8, at a children's museum. And I brought with me a bag full of legs, similar to the kinds of things you see up here, and had them laid out on a table for the kids. And from my experience, kids are naturally curious about what they don't know or don't understand or is foreign to them. They only learn to be frightened of those differences when an adult influences them to behave that way and maybe censors that natural curiosity or reins in the question asking in the hopes of them being polite little kids. So, I just pictured a first grade teacher out in the lobby with these unruly kids saying, "Now, whatever you do, don't stare at her legs." When, of course, that's the point. That's why I was there. I wanted to invite them to look and explore. So I made a deal with the adults that the kids could come in without any adults for 2 minutes on their own. So the doors open, the kids descend on this table of legs, and they are poking and prodding, and they're wiggling toes, and they're trying to put their full weight on the sprinting leg to see what happens with that. And I said, "Kids, really quickly, I woke up this morning, I decided I wanted to be able to jump over a house. Nothing too big, 2 or 3 stories, but if you could think of any animal, any superhero, any cartoon character, anything you can dream up right now, what kind of legs would you build me?" And immediately, a voice shouted, "Kangaroo! No, 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 it should be a frog. No, it should be Go-Go Gadget. No, 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 it should be The Incredibles," and other things that I aren't familiar with. And then one 8-year-old said, "Hey, why wouldn't you want to fly, too?" And the whole room, including me, was like, "Yeah." And just like that, I went from being a woman that these kids would have been trained to see as disabled to somebody who had potential that their bodies didn't have yet, somebody that might even be super abled. It's interesting. So some of you actually saw me at TED 11 years ago, and there's been a lot of talk about how life-changing this conference is for both speakers and attendees, and I am no exception. TED literally was the launch pad to the next decade of my life's exploration. At the time, the legs I presented were groundbreaking in prosthetics. I had woven carbon fiber sprinting legs modeled after the hind leg of a cheetah, which you may have seen on stage yesterday. And also these very lifelike, intrinsically painted silicone legs. So at the time, it was my opportunity to put a call out to innovators outside the traditional medical prosthetic community to come bring their talent to the science and to the art of building legs so that we can stop compartmentalizing form, function, and aesthetic and assigning them different values. Well, lucky for me, a lot of people answered that call. And the journey started, funny enough, with a TED conference attendee, Chi Perlman, who hopefully is in the audience somewhere today. She was the editor then of a magazine called ID, and she gave me a cover story. This started an incredible journey. Curious encounters were happening to me at the time. I'd been accepting numerous invitations to speak on the design of the cheetah legs around the world, and people would come up to me after the conference, after my talk, men and women, and the conversation would go something like this. "You know, Aimee, you're very attractive. You don't look disabled." I thought, well, that's amazing, because I don't feel disabled. And it really opened my eyes to this conversation that could be explored about beauty. What does a beautiful woman have to look like? What is a sexy body? And interestingly, from an identity standpoint, what does it mean to have a disability? I mean, Pamela Anderson has more prosthetic in her body than I do. Nobody calls her disabled. So this magazine, through the hands of graphic designer Peter Saville, went to fashion designer Alexander McQueen and photographer Nick Knight, who were also interested in exploring that conversation. So 3 months after TED, I found myself on a plane to London doing my first fashion shoot, which resulted in this cover, Fashion-able. 3 months after that, I did my first runway show for Alexander McQueen on a pair of hand-carved wooden legs made from solid ash. Nobody knew. Everyone thought they were wooden boots. Actually, I have them on stage with me. Grapevines, magnolias, truly stunning. Poetry matters. Poetry is what elevates the banal and neglected object to a realm of art. It can transform the thing that might have made people fearful into something that invites them to look, and look a little longer, and maybe even understand. I learned this firsthand with my next adventure, the artist Matthew Barney, in his film opus called The Cremaster Cycle. This is where it really hit home for me, that my legs could be wearable sculpture. And even at this point, I started to move away from the need to replicate humanness as the only aesthetic ideal. So we made what people lovingly refer to as glass legs, even though they're actually optically clear polyurethane, aka bowling ball material, heavy. Then we made these legs that are cast in soil with potato root system growing in them and beet roots out the top and a very lovely brass toe. There's a good close-up of that one. Then another character was a half woman, half cheetah, little homage to my life as an athlete. 14 hours of prosthetic makeup to get into a creature that had articulated paws, claws, and a tail that whipped around like a gecko. And then another pair of legs we collaborated on were these. Look like jellyfish legs, also polyurethane. And the only purpose that these legs can serve outside the context of the film is to provoke the senses and ignite the imagination. So whimsy matters. Today, I have over a dozen pair of prosthetic legs that various people have made for me. And with them, I have different negotiations of the terrain under my feet, and I can change my height. I have a variable of 5 different heights. Today, I'm 6'1". And I had these legs made a little over a year ago at Dorset Orthopedic in England, and when I brought them home to Manhattan, my first night out in the town, I went to a very fancy party, and a girl was there who has known me for years at my normal 5'8". Her mouth dropped open when she saw me, and she went, "But you're so tall!" And I said, "I know, isn't it fun?" I mean, I know it's a little bit like wearing stilts on stilts, but I have an entirely new relationship to door jams that I never expected I would ever have. And I was having fun with it. And she looked at me and she said, "But Aimee, that's not fair." And the incredible thing was she really meant it. It's not fair that you can change your height as you want it. And that's when I knew. That's when I knew that the conversation with society has changed profoundly in this last decade. It is no longer a conversation about overcoming deficiency. It's a conversation about augmentation. It's a conversation about potential. A prosthetic limb doesn't represent the need to replace loss anymore. It can stand as a symbol that the wearer has the power to create whatever it is that they want to create in that space. So people that society once considered to be disabled can now become the architects of their own identities and indeed continue to change those identities by designing their bodies from a place of empowerment. And what is exciting to me so much right now is that by combining cutting-edge technology, robotics, bionics, with the age-old poetry, we are moving closer to understanding our collective humanity. I think that if we want to discover the full potential in our humanity, we need to celebrate those heartbreaking strengths and those glorious disabilities that we all have. I think of Shakespeare's Shylock. If you prick us, do we not bleed? And if you tickle us, do we not laugh? It is our humanity and all the potential within it that makes us beautiful. Thank you.
I'm joined by New York-based fashion designer Yeohlee Teng and Bonnie St. John, a motivational speaker, Olympic medalist, and author of the upcoming book, How Great Women Lead. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So I'm going to start, Bonnie, with you. And coming off of Aimee's talk, I want to ask you to tell us your personal story.
I've had one leg for most of my life. The growth was stunted in my right leg. It was amputated when I was 5 years old. And even though I grew up in San Diego where there's no snow, I went on to become a ski racer. So It's kind of funny, a one-legged black girl from San Diego who becomes the ski racer.
Well, I got to tell you, I don't know which surprised me more, that you were an amputee skiing or black girl skiing. I say this, one black girl.
I'm actually the first African-American to win Olympic medals in skiing.
And congratulations to you on that. But right now we're focusing on disability and beauty. Aimee's feeling, and she expresses this in her talk, that the conversation is changing. It used to be about overcoming obstacles. Now she thinks it's more about potential. Do you agree?
Absolutely. It's about what we're able to do, not what we're disabled from. When I go to the hospital and see little kids getting their artificial legs made, you know, mine was a plain thing and they tried to make it look like flesh. Now they put superhero decals on them or tiger stripes, you know, and it's fun. It's sort of celebrated. Oh, you know, this is your new toy. So
they're really cool now.
Yeah, so I see that changing. But there's other things that aren't changing fast enough.
Like what?
Well, in terms of going to work and getting a job, the unemployment rates for people with disabilities are still 30 to 40% higher than they are for people without disabilities. I'm on the board of the National Organization on Disability, and if you think about it, getting a job is kind of a beauty contest. So this idea of what's beautiful and what's attractive isn't just for fun, it's also about our livelihood.
Right, and I want to come back to that intersection, which is key and critical, in just a moment. But I want to first talk on the broader picture about re-educating people, not just in the workplace, but on a daily basis. Do you find that in your work, but also in your personal life, that you have to re-educate people about what it means to be disabled?
I was asked actually to go in and talk to one of the networks, I won't say which one. Their news team wanted to talk about how do we cover people with disabilities? How do we not make mistakes or be rude or say the wrong thing? And they realized that because they were uncomfortable, they mostly didn't cover people with disabilities in the news. And so when people are uncomfortable, it's not neutral. It actually leaves us out. And so it is so important to do that, to talk to the news people about get comfortable, and to talk to teachers about get comfortable with the students, because otherwise we leave people out.
Yeah, and we don't want to leave people out. We want to be as inclusive as we possibly can be. That's why we're having this conversation today. And Yeohlee, I really liked what Aimee had to say about people with disabilities designing their bodies from a place of empowerment. And I guess that's what fashion is about, in a way, isn't it? A clothing designer, I guess in some ways, wants to help people empower themselves through their choices in fashion?
Well, my philosophy, my core philosophy has been clothes have magic, and that geometry forms shapes that can lend a wearer power. And I think that, you know, the reason I got into fashion has to do with your identity. So clothing can really influence perception. And I think that, you know, I would have to address this to Bonnie. Like, how do you think you're served by the clothes that are available to you today? Or are you not served by them?
I'm challenged as much by my leg, because it's very hard to find pants because of my artificial leg, but also because I'm very short and I'm curvy. So it's hard to find clothes for that body type. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's very interesting that you say that, because most women who are short are challenged by having to shop for clothes anyway. And I think that, you know, fashion dictates and necessity do not necessarily come together in the way clothes are edited, bought, and sold. You know, it really addresses, to a certain degree, a very superficial aspect of how one is supposed to look. And, you know, it brings also to mind the question of the standard of beauty. And I think in the Western world, the standard of beauty is informed by the Greco-Roman tradition. Mm-hmm. And to me, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And I think that if anybody with a disability should be able to seamlessly integrate whatever prosthetic they have into the conversation and into society with no apology.
Once upon a time, though, fashion would have worked to hide the disability, and now it seems there's more of an effort to celebrate it. Do each of you agree?
I got to do this fashion photo shoot for Oprah magazine, where
Yes,
I got
tell us
to wear
about that.
this $5,000 skirt with beads all over it and heavy jewelry and makeup and high heels. But my artificial leg with the metal and the titanium and the joints was showing in the midst of this evening wear. And I just thought that was so cool and exciting.
And fun, right?
Yeah, but it was the contrast in a way of saying, you know, here's this soft, glitzy evening with this harsh metal. Whereas if you were going to design something, or if you wanted to design the leg into the fashion as opposed to the contrast, what would you do with the leg?
You could have a lot of fun with that. I mean, you could.
We could.
Which you did on the Oprah shoot.
No, but that was putting the leg into the fashion. This is like, if we did fashion with the leg, what would we make up?
It would be designed expressly for you.
And that was Aimee's challenge, was this is a space to work in. It's not an impediment. It's actually a creative space, right?
Yeah. But would you consider a leg with a short?
Sure.
Because that would be interesting.
With shorts, you mean?
Yeah, one could be a full length, the other one could be shorter.
Yes, and because you could wear it in the winter and it wouldn't matter.
That's right.
That's the freedom you have.
And,
yeah.
and that would be a really interesting visual,
Yeah.
because it's very in your face.
Yeah,
So
in your
here I
face.
come.
Not
And
only
you said, Bonnie, in the Oprah article, that looking normal is overrated.
It said, I don't hide my leg, I show it off. And that would be the ultimate in showing it off, is saying, I'm wearing long pants on this side, but I don't have to on that side.
Can you
right.
say a little bit
That's
more?
wicked. You are wicked.
Say a little more about that, showing it off.
Is, you know what? My purpose, my identity is being motivational, inspiring others to reach their potential and embrace their talents. And so wearing my leg, now that I wear it without the cosmetic on it, without trying to make it look normal, it frees other people. They stop me on the street and go, oh, that's great, you know, or I was feeling bad, you know, now I realize I don't have as many problems as I thought, or where do you get that? I know my aunt needs, you know, one of those. So it engages people in a different conversation by putting it out there.
Was that a transition for you?
Absolutely.
And when did that happen and how?
Absolutely. When I was growing up, my mother did everything to hide it because she wanted to protect me from other people's
Understandably so.
attitudes at things. So she tried to cover it up, and she made me, you know, always walk normally, you know, don't hop around the house. And as I got older, I finally reached a point where I was more comfortable with it. I used to have two legs, so I would wear one on certain occasions and the other one when I felt freer. And then I finally evolved to a place where I just wear the titanium leg all the time.
And that must have felt freeing in some way, a relief not to be hiding something.
It is. I mean, going through airports, it's just easier to get through. I don't have to argue with anybody. They can see all the metal. It's right there, you know. And when you have fake flesh, if you get on the floor with a child or you're trying to, you know, get on your knees to do something, it's going to tear it.
Yeah.
So it's freeing literally from a function perspective as well, that I don't have to worry about ruining this fragile thing.
This fragile thing that isn't really
Me.
It's not really you. It wasn't who you wanted to be. Yeohlee, let's talk a little bit more about what a woman is, because Aimee Mullins talks a little bit about this. She asks, what does a beautiful woman and a sexy body look like? What is the impact that a fashion designer can have on evolving our notions of what beauty is?
I mean, if I were to have to define it, I think a sense of proportion really does, because it's how your eye perceives balance. So proportion is what I look toward. However, as a designer, my designing is design to me is a universal language. What works for her should theoretically work for you. My reward is when I can dress a 65-year-old and make her feel as terrific as the 24-year-old does in the same outfit. So those are the standards that I do my work by. And as far as other standards of beauty, you know, it is a very artificial world that we exist in because the media controls that and the advertisers controls the media. So your standard of beauty is very much decided by what they want to sell you. I mean, I think essentially, and I probably will get into a lot of trouble saying this, but most women buy more makeup than they need. Most women buy more clothes than they can wear. And all of us own too many pairs of shoes. Why is that? It's like cars. It's next year's model. And I think that it is very important to educate the consumer into buying what really works for her.
To what extent can you change the discussion, though? In a way, you're saying as a designer, I have to live in this world with the media and the attitudes and everything, but to what extent can you push back on that?
You should come and see what I do. Come visit my shop. Because I make clothes for women of all ages.
Real women.
Well, you see, there you go again. What's real women and our models a separate breed? Do you know what I mean?
They are. No, I'm kidding.
Why, though, picking up on that, I know you're joking a bit to ask the question, but let me pick up on that. Why the obsession with a single ideal when so few consumers meet that ideal?
I think that you have to go back to how people are brought up and how they're educated. Because, you know, it's what you value that matters. And, you know, we live in an age where, you know, the celebrity is the person we celebrate. But we don't know who, for instance, designed your leg, right? The person that made advances in that technology should be celebrated as a hero. But, you know, we don't really talk about those people. No. You know, and we talk about fashion and clothes. Whoever talks about the people who make their clothes.
Who really make the clothes.
Exactly. And I have been quoted many times about our lovely president's wife, Ms. Michelle Obama, and she talks in the public about all the designers that she wears. And I sit there and I say to myself, well, gee, where were the clothes made? Who sewed them? Who celebrates them? Yeah. So it has to do with our own sense of value.
Our value system. Let's talk about misconceptions. What are some of the misconceptions in hiring in this area about people with disabilities? And I even hesitate to use that word, disabilities.
It is the right word. Using handicapped, people don't say anymore because it comes from cap in hand, like a beggar. And so people, that's where that comes from. So really? But some of the misconceptions in the workplace are that if you hire people with disabilities, it will make other people uncomfortable, and we don't want to do that. But the actual data shows that when you bring in people with disabilities, it actually raises the morale because people see somebody who's dedicated and hardworking and talented, you know, and they have less excuses, and it tends to improve it. People think that they will be unreliable, and actually the data shows people with disabilities are actually much more reliable. There's less turnover, less absenteeism, more tenacity, more creativity in how to solve problems. So there's a lot of myths about that it'll be difficult or it'll be expensive to provide the accommodations they need, and the data has shown that that's all untrue. It's a National Organization on Disability. You can get some of that data at their website.
Before we started, we were talking a little bit amongst ourselves about gender discrimination. We talk about race discrimination a lot in this country. We are talking more and more about sexual orientation, even age discrimination. What's happening in terms of the civil rights on this issue?
people say it's about 30 years behind the rest of the civil rights movements, and that just now things are starting to happen that happened 30 years ago for some of the other groups. It's interesting, there's the word sexism, there's the word racism, but we don't even have a word for discriminating against people with disabilities. And there's a lot, when you start getting into this, you see a lot of people patronizing them and really, you know, undermining them and assuming they can't do things. And we don't even see that as discrimination because we're so used to it. If somebody did that to a woman and treated them that way, like, oh, you can't really do this, you know, that's considered sexism. But we haven't reached the point of that awareness yet. But what I'm feeling with the companies that I visit all over the country in the work that I do is there's a new groundswell of companies really getting committed to this in the diversity of the work they do. They've done a lot of work on gender, they've done a lot of work on LGBT and on race, but for disability, they're starting to have more awareness of it. There's more employment of people with cognitive disabilities. Some companies are making huge commitments to change the way they hire, the way they interview, the software that they use to be more accommodating. I think we're really at the knee of the curve to start to see some change here. It is an exciting time.
So I want to ask each of you a last question, a broader question, and it's about overcoming obstacles because you're both very successful women. And I want to ask each of you about an obstacle that you have overcome, or more specifically, the key to your success. And you get a minute to think, Bonnie, because I'm going to ask Yeohlee first. Yeohlee, the key to your success?
Have a vision, believe in yourself, do whatever you want to do.
And Bonnie St. John, the key to your success?
I think it's important to have a vision, as you said, but it's also very important to help other people see that vision. Is the skill of being able to help other people see you as more than they might have seen.
All right, excellent advice. So thank you both so much for being with us. Bonnie St. John, Yeohlee Teng, it's been a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
And that's our show. Join me next time for more compelling conversation on TED Talks in NYC. We leave you with some panelists from our other TED shows and what they said was the key to their success. Thanks for watching. I'm Jami Floyd.
My secret to success is to be relentless.
8 hours of sleep.
Tenacity.
Smiling a lot.
It presupposes that I'm successful.
Love people. Listen, pay attention, and try to live in the moment as much as possible.
First is exercise. I live by it. I love it. I do it every single day. It makes me strong like bull, both physically and psychologically, and of course, my faith in God.
Surrounding myself with loving people and who provide me lots of support for the things I do.
My sense of humor. I'm horribly funny.
Like Steve Jobs said, love what you do.
A lot of hard work.
If you can get people to keep asking you that question, you will appear to be successful and no one has to know.